Greetings! In this video, I will talk about the life of Grigory Rasputin. Together, we will try to understand the phenomenon of Rasputin, how he gained immense influence in Russia, and how his activities exposed the abyss of immorality into which the ruling elite of Tsarist Russia had fallen on the eve of the collapse of the Russian Empire. First, a few words about the biography of our hero. Grigory Rasputin was born in 1869 in the village of Pokrovskoye, Tyumen district, Tobolsk province. Ethnically, his family belonged to the Komi people, but by the time of Grigory's birth, they had completely assimilated into Russian culture. Rasputin's wife was Praskovya Fyodorovna Dubrovina, a resident of a neighboring village who bore him 3 children, Matryona, Varvara, and Dmitri. It is said that he was not faithful to his wife, often having sexual relations with other women without hiding it from her, even right in their family home. However, Praskovya endured all his transgressions without protest, and when questioned by outsiders, she would answer, "He has enough for everyone." In the late 1890s, he began wandering to holy places in Russia, visiting various Orthodox monasteries and churches, engaging with monks and priests, praying a lot, and reflecting on God and religion. During his travels, he came to believe that he could feel and understand God better than priests, and that he could preach the Christian faith to people at least as well as they could. Grigory led an ascetic lifestyle during his travels and possessed extraordinary charisma. He spoke persuasively and interestingly, so it's no surprise that he soon became known as Elder Grigory. I believe you understand that in Orthodoxy, the title elder did not imply that the person had reached an advanced age. An elder was a spiritual practitioner who had attained a high degree of moral and spiritual perfection and was in the closest possible spiritual unity with God. Usually, elders were monks, but Grigory never took monastic vows. However, in order to better fit the image of an elder, Grigory added a few years to his age and claimed he was born 5 years earlier, in 1864. In 1903, Grigory Rasputin's fate changed dramatically. During his travels, he arrived at the St. Michael's Monastery in Kiev, where he stayed for some time. During this period, 2 Grand Duchesses, Militsa and Stana, arrived at the monastery. These were sisters, Montenegrin princesses, who had married Grand Dukes. Militsa married Peter Nikolaevich, and Stana, under the name Anastasia, married Nicholas Nikolaevich. One morning, they noticed a wanderer in the monastery yard chopping firewood. It was Rasputin, earning his living. A conversation began between the Grand Duchesses and the wanderer. Rasputin spoke interestingly to the ladies about his travels, describing the monasteries and holy places he had visited. The conversation about God and religion left a profound impression on the Grand Duchesses. Grigory spoke very persuasively and compellingly. The conversation ended with the ladies inviting the wanderer to visit them in St. Petersburg for tea. Rasputin quickly accepted the invitation and soon became a regular guest in the salons of the Grand Duchesses. He was indeed an interesting conversationalist, and Militsa decided to recommend him to the Empress. It is important to note here that Empress Alexandra Feodorovna had difficulty bonding with people. She had very few close friends, and one of her few confidants was precisely Militsa. So, in November 1905, the imperial couple met Rasputin for the first time. I will describe this meeting later, but for now, it is important to explain the situation in the imperial family at that time. Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, born a German princess named Victoria Alice Helena Louise Beatrice, of Hesse-Darmstadt, before her conversion to Orthodoxy, married Nicholas II in November 1894. But for a long time she was unable to bear him a son, a legitimate heir to the Russian throne. She regularly gave birth to daughters, Olga in 1895, Tatiana in 1897, Maria in 1899, but despite all her prayers, she could not conceive a son. Alexandra Feodorovna felt guilty for not fulfilling her primary role and decided to seek help from various miracle workers and mystics. The first of these was the Fool for Christ, Dmitry Popov, better known as Mitya Kozelsky, widely believed to have the ability to perform miracles. He could not speak coherently and only mooed, but his reputation as a blessed man compelled the Empress to communicate with him. Also, visiting the imperial family was a certain Vasily Tkachenko, known as Vozia Bosonozhka, as well as the Archimandrite Iliador, a complete adventurer, but one who was believed to have the gift of exorcising demons. For a long time, a man named Monsieur Philippe stayed with the royal family. Monsieur Philippe, his full name, was Nizier Antelme Philippe, claimed to be an all-powerful magician, and engaged in illegal medical practices, for which he was convicted by a French court. In 1901, the imperial family invited him to Russia. Monsieur Philippe explained to Alexandra Feodorovna that he could communicate with the dead, and promised her that after a series of spiritual seances she would definitely bear a son. Indeed, Alexandra Feodorovna gave birth again in 1901, but once again it was a daughter, Anastasia. However, the imperial couple continued their interactions with Monsieur Philippe. Not long after, the Empress felt that she was pregnant again. Monsieur Philippe confidently predicted that it would be a boy. However, it turned out to be a false pregnancy. Sensing that things were going wrong, Monsieur Philippe returned to France. Following this, the royal couple, likely on the advice of Militsa, began to place their hopes in the intercession of Seraphim of Sarov, who had passed away in 1834. At that time, his canonization process was underway. It was said that Nicholas II even pressured the members of the synod to canonize this saint. Seraphim of Sarov was also proclaimed the patron saint of the imperial family. In July 1903, Nicholas and Alexandra went to the Sarov monastery and prayed in the church for the gift of an heir, and the miracle occurred. In 1904, Alexandra finally gave birth to the long-awaited son, Alexei. However, the joy of the imperial couple was short-lived. It soon became clear that Alexei was suffering from a terrible, incurable disease, even to this day, hemophilia, a blood disorder inherited from his mother, meaning his blood could not clot. Alexandra Feodorovna herself did not have hemophilia, but she was a carrier of the gene responsible for it. The disease manifested in such a way that any bruise or scratch would cause severe bleeding in the boy, which was very difficult to stop. Particularly dangerous were bleeding from the mouth or nose, as it was impossible to apply a bandage to these areas to stop the bleeding. Now the imperial couple resumed their search for a holy man, this time one who could help alleviate their son's suffering. Naturally, Alexandra's friend, Militsa, recommended that she meet Rasputin. Thus, in November 1905, the imperial couple met Elder Grigory for the first time. He made a very good impression on them with his conversations, but most importantly, he mentioned that he knew about their son's problem and was ready to help him. On one of their subsequent meetings, Rasputin was taken to Alexei's bedroom, where the boy could not sleep due to pain in his joints and was quietly groaning. Rasputin leaned over the boy, silently prayed, and the pain disappeared. The Tsarevich calmed down and fell asleep peacefully. Yes, yes, my friends, Rasputin was apparently a clairvoyant and had healing abilities. There are accounts from eyewitnesses who reported how Elder Grigory, at their request, would relieve them of headaches. Rasputin would whisper something softly over the sick person, and the pain would immediately vanish. There are also numerous testimonies of how the elder repeatedly stopped life-threatening bleeding in the Tsarevich. If Rasputin was not nearby, he would be called, and he would invariably stop the attack of the disease. Now imagine how this affected the exalted empress, who saw him as a saint sent to her by God. Rasputin visited the royal family many times, talked with Alexandra and the children about God, calling the Tsar Papa and the Tsarina Mama. Naturally, Rasputin stayed in St. Petersburg. First renting a room, then a 4-room apartment, and from 1914, a 5-room apartment on Gorokhovaya Street. The apartment was quite modest, and Rasputin initially lived quite simply. In 1906, he asked the emperor for permission to change his surname to Rasputin Novik, or simply Novuk, explaining that many of his fellow villagers carried the same surname, which could lead to misunderstandings. Perhaps the elder wanted to distance himself from any negative connotations associated with the surname Rasputin. Permission was granted. However, over time, the lifestyle of the elder changed significantly. On one hand, the empress gradually became more and more exalted in her attitude towards him, and decided that the elder was sent by God not only to save her child, but to correct and save the entire empire, no more, no less. Therefore, it was necessary to listen to his advice on governance. On the other hand, the elder figured out how to profit from his position. Gradually, his apartment on Gorokhovaya Street turned into a sort of salon, where aspirants for lucrative positions and government contracts gathered. After all, why bother striving and building a career when a single note from the elder could instantly elevate an applicant to dizzying heights? Visitors would leave substantial financial contributions for consulting the elder, which were collected by his secretaries. They shamelessly swindled Rasputin, but he still kept a considerable amount. If a visitor pleased him, he would write a note to the appropriate official, usually with the same formula. My dear, forgive me for the appeal, accept the unfortunate, and help. Grigory. It gets worse. Rasputin effectively began appointing high-ranking government officials. For example, after the assassination of Stolypin, the question arose of appointing a new minister of the interior. The most suitable candidate was identified as the governor of Nizhny Novgorod, Alexei Khvostov. Rasputin paid him a visit, but Khvostov did not realize who had come and greeted the elder rather coldly. In his letter to the empress, Rasputin spoke unfavorably of Khvostov. The result was that Alexander Makarov was appointed Minister of the Interior. Khvostov was elected to the State Duma. But now he began to understand how to behave with Rasputin, and he achieved his goal. In 1915, he was finally appointed minister. In 1916, through Rasputin's efforts, Alexander Protopopov also took this post. It is said that, largely due to his efforts, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, was dismissed, and the position was taken by Emperor Nicholas II himself. These examples could be extended further, but I think it is clear enough. It is probably well known that Rasputin had a tendency for extramarital sexual relations with women, a desire he could not overcome, and he never missed an opportunity to engage in adultery. Rasputin rather uniquely tried to justify his behavior with the famous saying, "If you don't sin, you won't repent, and if you don't repent, you won't be saved." In St. Petersburg, he had a vast number of lovers from high society. As recalled by someone close to Rasputin, his admirers can be divided into two categories. Some believed in his supernatural power and his holiness, in his divine purpose, while others simply considered it fashionable to associate with him or try to gain some advantages for themselves or their loved ones through him. When Rasputin was reproached for his weakness toward women, he usually responded by saying that his guilt wasn't so great, as many high-ranking individuals would literally hang their mistresses and even wives around his neck in order to gain some advantage for themselves. And most of these women entered into intimate relations with him with the consent of their husbands or relatives. Everyone was afraid of him and flattered him. Ladies would kiss his food-stained hands and wouldn't shy away from his blackened nails. Without using utensils, he would distribute pieces of food among his admirers with his hands at the table, and they would try to convince him that they considered it a form of bliss. It was repulsive to witness such scenes, but Rasputin's guests had grown used to this and accepted it with unparalleled patience. But Grigory lacked the company of high society ladies and the wives of officials, and he regularly utilized the services of prostitutes, sometimes seeing several in a single day. Generally, he took them to the bathhouse located across from his house. The guards from the security department who were observing Rasputin noted that some of these visits were extremely brief, lasting as little as 20 minutes. This can be easily explained. Although prostitution in the Russian Empire was quite regulated, with each prostitute having identification, a medical book, and undergoing regular medical examinations, venereal diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea were quite common in that environment. Rasputin simply feared infection and would first require them to undress, followed by a thorough inspection. Those deemed unsuitable were sent away. In his last years, Rasputin led a very indulgent lifestyle. He was a regular at expensive restaurants, where he spent exorbitant amounts of money. A gypsy choir was usually summoned, as Rasputin was very fond of gypsy singing. He was also a passionate dancer and excelled at Russian dances. There, one could often encounter people with very loud names and titles. Meanwhile, the society ladies tried to outshine the choristers and chanson singers with their antics. It is said that in one of the restaurants, Rasputin, after drinking, began to undress and, to amuse the crowd, waved his member around and boasted about a shirt embroidered by the old woman, even though the empress was younger than he was. It's not surprising that among the general public the belief spread that one of Rasputin's lovers was Alexandra Feodorovna. This belief was quite persistent, and we can hear in the famous song Rasputin, once performed by the group Boney M, the lyrics, "Ra Ra Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen." This is without a doubt a mistake. Alexandra Feodorovna, although a rather exalted woman, perceived Rasputin as a holy man, sent to save the heir to the throne, and even Russia itself. The idea that there was an affair between them arose because the public was unclear about the nature of the empress's attachment to this rogue. After all, little was known about the illness of the heir. Rasputin behaved quite modestly within the royal family. It is even said that when he was called unexpectedly, and at that moment was dead drunk, the elder would instantly sober up, and even the smell of alcohol would somehow disappear. Eventually, Rasputin's antics had thoroughly tired everyone out. As a result, a conspiracy was formed against him, with the goal of saving the monarchy from the man who was severely discrediting it. The immediate executors of the murder were Prince Felix Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and State Duma Deputy Vladimir Purishkevich. I should remind you, the head of the notorious chauvinistic organization Union of Michael the Archangel. In December 1916, Yusupov invited Rasputin to his home, supposedly to examine and try to heal his wife, Irina. Rasputin was led into a room in the basement, where he was killed. The murder became surrounded by fantastic details. Supposedly, he ate poisoned, cyanide-laced cakes, which had no effect on him. Then he was shot several times, drowned in an ice hole, and even when the police pulled him out of the hole, he was still alive. It was much simpler than that. Later, Dr. Lazavert, who was supposed to put poison in the cakes, admitted that he had gotten scared and didn't do it. The other conspirators were waiting for his death. Not waiting any longer, Yusupov shot him in the stomach. It seemed Rasputin had died, but unexpectedly he jumped up and ran. Purishkevich shot him 3 times and hit him in the back. Then one of the conspirators finished the job with a final shot to the forehead. The elder's body was dumped in the ice hole. Naturally, this murder changed nothing. The entire system had already decayed so much that its further existence was impossible. And finally, you won't believe it, but in the 1990s, within the radically monarchist, near-church circles, the idea emerged to canonize Grigory Rasputin as a saint. On the illustration, you can see an icon, painted in 2000, titled Saint Great Martyr Grigory and Saint Great Martyr Alexei. As they say, the absurdity deepened. And with that, I conclude my story. Goodbye.